Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today we've got another episode of Scotch Sunday. Although for me, I guess I should say tonight, because I just got done playing a concert here in Columbus with the orchestra. It went incredibly well. I could not be happier with how the percussion section played, but it had a lot of high pressure moments in there for me. And so after a stressful concert like that, the best thing in my book is to come home, take off the dress clothes, slip into something more comfortable, as they say, and sit down to relax and unwind with a nice whiskey or whiskeys. And usually I'm doing that by myself, but tonight I'm doing it on camera with all of you because we have to get into these two Springbank 12-year cask strengths. We have two different batches to check out in this review. So on your left in the bottle is batch 19, bottled at 57.1% ABV, and I have to thank my friend Frank for donating the rest of this bottle to the channel. And on your right is a sample of batch 21. This one's bottled at 56.1% ABV, so a 1% ABV difference. That's very slight between the two, but the much bigger difference is the percentage of various casks that have gone into each of these blends. So for batch 19, this is 65% ex-bourbon and 35% sherry. But for batch 21, we have a crazy mashup of things. 45% sherry casks, 25% ex-bourbon, 25% burgundy, and 5% port. So a little bit more, bourbon focused for batch 19. And for batch 21, there's a lot of these ex-wine casks. We're gonna see how that affects the nose and the palate of each of these. We're gonna nerd out about them as well. It's not every day I get to taste Springbank. These are the only Springbanks I have with me right now. The rest of my collection has been consumed and I have not been able to replenish that. So let's get into them now. This is batch 19 first on the nose. Let's check it out and see what we get. All right, so batch 19 is very direct, very focused on the profile. That's the first impression for me, is that this thing is jumping out of the glass. It knows exactly what it is. There's no confusion about it. And I think that comes from the high proportion of ex-bourbon casks in here, which just kind of give it this backbone. It feels like a no-nonsense whiskey. And I know I'm using a lot of metaphor, personification to kind of describe this, but I like to do a little bit more of that when I'm thinking about Scotch. And in this case, yeah, this Springbank, it's very confident, very bold. It knows exactly what it is. And that ex-bourbon profile is it's just kind of screaming at you out of the glass. All right, so let's dive in a little bit more specifically now. So top notes for this whiskey. For me, I get a lot of white pepper. All of the spice for me is concentrated into this white pepper oak spice. There's nothing super aromatic about the spice profile on this one. I do get kind of a vanilla cream or vanilla custard kind of note, a nice boozy caramel sauce as well. So all of the notes I just described for me are coming from the ex-bourbon casks, I would say. That's kind of the top note, the thing that hits you first. But as you dig beneath that, there are some nice fruit notes. Yeah, I would say this one has kind of some melon going on in here. It has that typical Springbank funky overripe pineapple or overripe mango kind of note. There's just always that tropical character to these Springbanks. And I think when you get a lot of ex-bourbon casks in the mix, those notes pop out more. Whereas when you have more sherry or other wine casks, I think sometimes those funkier fruits kind of get masked or covered up or at least integrated with those sherry notes, and they're a little less obvious. So definitely some melon and some funky tropical fruits. More faint in the background, I would say I'm getting some pencil shaving notes. And of course you get the salinity, that sea air, that briny saltiness that you would expect from a Springbank. So all in all, I think this thing is a little brash. I like it. Of course it is cask strength. It is 12 years old. That makes sense, but I like the confidence of this whiskey. Now, let's get it on the palate. Cheers. What a fantastic first impression from this whiskey. The first thing that I'm hit with is actually not a big spice punch like I might have expected. It's actually this pear and kind of apple skin note, this little bit of tangy, bitter, but bright, juicy fruit kind of note. That's the very first thing that I'm hit with, and also just a little bit of like a campfire ash. So these are things that may have been on the nose, but they were not the dominant things that I was kind of picking up on. I like it. It's a great first impression from this whiskey. And as it starts to develop on the palate, the white pepper spice joins in I don't know, somewhere along the way, somewhere in the mid palate, I guess. And that actually helps propel this and carry it forward. It doesn't lose itself in the beginning of the sip. It doesn't hit you right away with the spice and then trail off. It actually ramps up in the middle of the development. I love that about a whiskey. I love when a whiskey can sustain itself, have a longer drinking experience, a longer finish with the way that the spice actually integrates into the profile, into the development. So great first impression from this. Fantastic stuff. Let's go in for another sip. So now that my palate has acclimated to the spicier and pointier notes in this whiskey, the second sip changes just a little bit. And now instead of getting all of those intense flavors and spicier notes, I'm now able to kind of get into the backbone of the whiskey just a little bit more. So this is where all of those overstewed tropical fruits are coming to play, as well as just that general toffee, or maybe I said earlier, the boozy caramel sauce note that I'm getting in here. These, for me, make up the backbone of the whiskey. First sip is just to kind of get your palate into that realm. You're shocked a little bit, at least I was, by some of those brighter, more tangy but bitter fruit notes that I got on the front of the palate. But now I'm into some of those, darker notes. It feels a little bit more rich, and I like the second sip. As we get into the finish now of this second sip, the only thing I can think of is when you're eating sushi and you have those that little bit of pickled ginger with your sushi. There's like this pickled ginger tingliness on my tongue as I'm into the finish now. It's kind of a cool combination of things. So overall, I really enjoy this batch 19 Springbank. If I had a criticism of this batch, I would say that it's probably just related to the nose, where it feels a little tight, a little closed off. And again, you could explore this with water if you wanted, and I'm sure you could open this thing up just a little bit more on the nose, and some other flavors would come to play. But now we're gonna get into batch 21, and I don't have very much of this left. Again, we're talking crazy amounts of wine casks and different things in the blend here. I'm excited for this one. Let's check it out on the nose now and see what we get. All right, and right away, you get all of those different casks on the nose. I'm gonna start rattling off some notes here. Yes, you get this raisin effect that I would imagine is coming from not only the sherry casks, but also the port casks as well. It's that kind of dry raisin kind of note. I'm also getting blueberries on this, and I don't know if I'm just gonna ascribe this to one of those casks in there incorrectly, but I would say maybe the Burgundy casks are giving that little bit of a blueberry note. It's like this fresh, dark berry kind of thing, which is a nice contrast to the dark, dry raisin notes. So you get dry, you get fresh, but overall, first impression on the nose, tons of dark fruits, a little more subdued. This feels, I mean, again, we're gonna get into some maybe silly metaphors. It feels like a more mysterious whiskey, like something that you have to explore and pick apart, whereas the batch 19 for me felt, again, direct and very, very potent in its delivery. So back to the nose here for batch 21. So not only is this a very fruity batch of Springbank, but it's also got a great chocolate profile to it as well. And in this case, I would call this more of a light, airy cocoa powder kind of note. There's also some bubblegum or cotton candy that's playing along in here as well. And that's interesting to me because not only am I getting these brighter candied fruit notes from the bubblegum, the cotton candy, but I'm also getting a fresh dark berry and a dry dark raisin. It kind of runs the gamut. It just spans a lot of different fruit elements. And again, I have to attribute that to the crazy combination of casks in here. There's also a nice aromatic cinnamon spice, and that differs pretty sharply from batch 19, which again was more of that white pepper, that white pepper, almost a generic oak spice. I hate to use the word generic, but that's the way I would classify it. This one feels more aromatic, a little more interesting. Let's get it on the palate now. Cheers. Wow, the complexity of this one is off the charts. Sometimes when you work with this many different casks in a blend, things can come off a little confused. It can feel more like an experiment or like someone showing off as opposed to actually constructing a comprehensive profile for the whiskey. I don't think that's a problem here. This goes through so many phases and across so many layers. I mean, this is just a fantastic whiskey. And I think already on the first sip, I would say that this is my favorite over this batch 19. I mean, the batch 19 for me is something I think I would want to drink outside or in a more noisy or boisterous environment because, again, it gets to the point. But this batch 21 is something that I want to sit with. I want to spend some time with this one and explore everything. I'm so blown away on the palate, not only by the various tasting notes, which, I mean, that's kind of, to me, that's kind of the basic part of it, right? Just calling out tasting notes. It's more about the drinking experience of this and how it weaves between sweet, sour, savory, spicy, salty, all of these, and smoky too, all of these aspects of the whiskey, and how, I mean, it just feels like they're so perfectly threaded together that it makes for such an interesting development. I think some people may consider this to be a little bit of a flatter whiskey, maybe in comparison to batch 19, maybe overall, I don't know. I don't have a problem with it. It does feel 20% more subdued than this other batch, but I think it's for good reason. And I think that helps this whiskey come across as an enveloping kind of whiskey, especially when you first get it on the palate. So I don't even know if I said any tasting notes there. And to me, it's not even about that. It's just about the experience of the whiskey. So this is gonna be my final sip because I'm about to run out of this sample. Cheers, guys, here we go. All right, so I'm gonna try to remember everything that just happened to my palate. Up front, a huge dose of spiced orange, actually. It's like that Thanksgiving or Christmas time kind of spiced orange note that you would imagine with clove and cinnamon. But just after that, as this thing starts to develop, that's when you get into all of those sherried fruit notes that you might expect from something that has 45% of the blend being finished in these sherry casks or matured in these sherry casks. You do get those typical sherry notes, but again, because of the various casks going on in here, I have to, at least that's what I would attribute this to, is the sensation of getting those juicy, but also dry, but also candied kind of fruit notes. It really alternates and weaves between all of those things. Again, that's right kind of at the front of the palate, the beginning of the development. As it begins to roll back, there's this big dose of smoky green apple. And I don't know if that really makes sense. And so let me try to break this down. I guess what I'm trying to say is, whereas batch 19 felt like campfire ash, batch 21 actually has more of an overt smoke note to it. And that's working together with the cocoa powder note. And those make sense, right? They're kind of both a little on the darker side. But playing along with that at the very same time is just this sour green apple. It's like puckeringly sour. Crazy. This thing goes through a lot of different phases, and finally now into the finish, I'm left with really nice leather notes. So I think batch 21, I have no more left to sip. Probably my favorite between these two, but both fantastic. It really depends on your mood and what you want out of your whiskey. At the end of the day, Springbank just makes fantastic stuff. It's almost a little, I don't want to say boring to review these, but in the sense that I feel like I'm gonna like pretty much every one of them. It's gonna be some gradation of like, love, or absolutely infatuated with it. There's not really a Springbank that I've tried where I've said, oh my God, I don't like that. And that's just a testament to their consistency and to nailing a profile that straddles so many lines from Isla lovers to people that love Highland to people that love stuff from various islands. Just they nail everything. They nail multi-backbone, they nail sherry finishing, they nail the perfect amount of peat influence and coastal influence. So at the end of the day, I just love Springbank. I would highly recommend these 12-year cask strengths. I know they're getting harder to find. I know they're getting upcharged on secondary. But rest assured, when you buy one of these, you are buying a quality whiskey with great proof points for these, of course, but even for the standard bottlings, non-chill filtered, 46%, no color added. I mean, what else you got to say? Springbank is amazing. These are amazing. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Colin, for sending these my way, for letting me borrow them, or just donating the bottle. You guys are awesome. That's going to do it. Cheers, guys. Let me know what you think of Springbank in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.